There we are. Hello, hello. How are you? Happy Monday afternoon. This is Linda Downey. If you're catching me somewhere streaming on the internet, this is playing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places. This is an episode of the podcast, The UnConditioned Life, and playing in multiple places on social media. So I would love for you to say hello if you're watching. Let me know where you're watching from, or if you catch the replay later. And today's conversation is about, this was a surprise for me when I learned this. It's really about the fact that, hi Charm, nice to see you, that the trauma that we experience, whatever that is, however painful it may be, is really not the problem. The events of our life are not the problem, it's something else. And so as people are coming on, I'll just wait a few minutes to really get into that. But this morning on my coffee conversation, I do just like a 3 to 5 minute coffee conversation several mornings a week. And this was what I talked about. And a few people have reached out to me throughout the day. So I thought, okay, I think it's a good topic to really have a bigger conversation on. So let's dive in. You know, things happen in our life, right? And sometimes people have really wonderful childhoods. Sometimes people have really difficult childhoods. And what makes those events have the impact that they have? Well, let's first talk about that. How do they impact our life later? So those events, and science is showing this conclusively now, there's no question about it, is that what we experienced in our past will show up now in our present and continue to show up in our future unless we do something differently to change that. And it shows up in things like our health, because those events were stressful, painful, upsetting, and they triggered our nervous system, and now our nervous system keeps responding to that, and that affects our health. That affects the immune system, digestive system, hormones, all of that. So that's the way that those things affect our health. They also affect, or they create, certain patterns that we have in our relationships, in dealing with other people and making our choices and how our life unfolds, because we keep trying to cope with what we learned from that event, or try to do the opposite of what we learned. But in some way, shape, or form, it has us repeating what we learned, but it's not the event. So I don't care whether it's something really, really traumatic or something really little. I'm going to give you examples of both, but something really minor, they both can have equally impactful influence, let's say influence on our later life, or non-impactful, even if it was a really big thing. So if you've ever heard of Dr. Wayne Dyer, he gives a great example of this. Wayne Dyer, D-Y-E-R. If you've ever listened to him or read any of his books, he gives a great example, because he grew up being raised by a single mom, a lot of trauma in his childhood. His dad was an alcoholic who left, I think, there were 3 boys under the age of 5 when his dad left as an alcoholic, and his mom worked really, really hard. And Wayne Dyer went on to become in life a hugely successful speaker. He wrote many, many books. He spoke all over the world. He was followed by tons of people. And he spoke about spirituality. He spoke about healing. He spoke, a lot about these kinds of conversations, and he was very successful. And if you ask him, this is how he tells it. If you ask him, how did that happen, that you became this amazing person and influenced people and wrote all these books? And he would say, well, it's because my dad left my mom when we were very, very little. My dad was an alcoholic, and my mom worked really hard and had to raise us by herself. And it was very, very painful and difficult childhood. So I decided who I wanted to be about that, and that I wanted to bring healing and help to the world. Now he has a brother. He was one of 3 boys. He has a brother who struggled his whole life, also became an alcoholic, also couldn't hold a job, never really was steady with his family. And Wayne Dyer would say, if you ask my brother why that happened, he'll say, because my father was an alcoholic who left my mother with 3 little boys, and that was a really hard childhood. So the same exact circumstances, one person becomes a global success and alters millions of lives. The other person can't hold a job, never has a family, and becomes an alcoholic. And they both give the same reason for why their lives went that way. So that's one example. I thought maybe you might have heard of him, so maybe you know that story. But it's true for all of us. So I also grew up in an alcoholic household and, had difficult issues when I was a child. My mom died when I was 4. So I went through a lot of, up into my adulthood with, these problems are the reason that I have problems. Those things that happened are the reason why I struggle. That loss, that feeling of abandonment, all of that stuff is why I get sick. But here's the truth. It's not that. Those events are done, they happen, and they're done. It's how we interpret them. It's the lens through which we experience that, and then the interpretation that we make. Then that interpretation carries over and stays with us. That's really what the problem is. It is not the trauma, even if it's really, really bad trauma. And let me give you the opposite. Here's an example of a woman who was voted most likely to succeed in her high school, went on to work on Wall Street, and was really always acknowledged for her skill and her talent. But when it came to actually achieving her goals, she never would. She kept self-sabotaging what she wanted to do in her life. She kept not hitting her mark, even though she had amazing intelligence and really good skills and talent in her field. And what she was able to figure out was that when she was very little, about 5 years old, there was an experience in her family with her older sister. And her mom gave the older sister a popsicle when they were after eating lunch. And then she asked for a popsicle and her mom said, no, you can't have one until you eat your lunch. A very simple experience, not traumatic at all, nothing wrong with what her mom did. But that 5-year-old little girl decided that she wasn't important, that she was not important, and that her mom loved her sister more. So the experience is not the issue. It is the lens that we see it. And the younger that we are, the more unreasonable the lens will be, for lack of a better word, because we don't have good logical adult thinking when we're 3 and 4 and 5. So we're going to see it through a 5-year-old's point of view, a 3-year-old's point of view. And here's really the clincher, is that it's going to stay in our body even as we grow and age into adulthood. It will stay in our body through that 3-year-old filter. And so, again, whether it's something very, very serious, because people have really, really serious things, really, really impactful, terrible things that happen to them, and they overcome them. It's not that we forget about what happens. It's not that, it's not anything other than you recognize the interpretation and the meaning that you give it. And then we start to change that. And we can change it now, which means it's changing our neural pathways, changing the way we think. And the neural pathways that got carved out when we were little. A neural pathway is just a series of nerves, right? Sending a thought down, the same thought, down the same path. That's a neural pathway. So those pathways got created back as when we were 3 and 5. But we have plasticity, we have neuroplasticity, which means we have the ability to change it. So with neuroplasticity and understanding how to rewire, we can actually change those neural pathways and change the meaning. And that is how you heal from the trauma. That's how you heal from it at a subconscious level. And it's the subconscious level that's actually driving most of our life. 95% of our life is being driven subconsciously, not by our conscious thoughts, not by what we're thinking about. You know, that woman was not thinking about that popsicle at lunch for her whole life. She probably, you know, never thought of it again until she started digging deep. We all have a million memories that we're not thinking about at all, but they're in there, and they're in there at the level of the age that they happened when you interpreted them. And then they are affecting your nervous system, they're affecting your choices. So we're making choices to cope with feeling abandoned or feeling like I'm not important, or my mother loves my sister more because she got the popsicle. So we're making choices as a 40-year-old in our careers, in our relationships, that are affecting those and coming from the 3-year-old interpretation, which is just so fascinating to me. And you know, when I learned that back in the 90s, I attended a seminar and then got really into transformational coaching. That's when I started doing transformational coaching. It was mind-blowing to me because I had always lived like that was even like my identity. My father was an alcoholic. I grew up in a household. My mom died when I was 4. Like, it was my whole woe is me story. And it really was the identity that like shaped who I was. And it was also shaping my health. I did not know that at the time. Now we have the science to prove that the thoughts and the emotions completely 100% drive our health. Our physical health is an expression of our thoughts and emotions. When we change them, then the body can start to heal. When we keep them intact in that damaging way, that damaging interpretation of I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, all of that, that keeps our nervous system in fear and in stress, that keeps us sick. And the science is there now to prove it. Hey, Michelle. So, oh, good. He says, yeah, it is fascinating. Michelle says it's fascinating. It is to me. It is the thing that actually really shifted my whole life. Well, it shifted my whole life back in the 90s in terms of relationships and choices. What I didn't realize back then, and I don't think the science was as available, is how much it affected my health. So that kind of lagged behind until I understood the health part of it. But it really does. Our physical body and the health that we are experiencing is an outward representation of the thoughts and feelings that they're kind of like the soup in the crock pot, right? It's like the soup that your nervous system is swimming in, the thoughts and feelings that you have every day. And if they are things like life sucks, this is really hard for me, terrible things happened to me, I had this, I had that. If those are the thoughts and feelings that you have every day, your physical body can't get better. And your relationships are not going to get better either, because you're going to be in walls are up, I'm guarded, I'm not going to show my heart, I'm not going to be vulnerable. It also keeps us holding anger because anger already has a fertile ground. When when that little girl didn't get her popsicle as a 5-year-old, she was angry, right? And then that anger stays in the body, and it's easy to breed more anger. So it all becomes like a cycle. And the way to release that, it's not about doing anything about the events. The trauma really is nothing without the meaning and the interpretation that you give it. It's really nothing. That's the place where you want to go to work. And you're not going to ever, obviously, forget about what happened, but it doesn't have to keep affecting you, and it doesn't have to keep your body sick. So there's tons of research. Southwestern University Medical Center in the early 2000s published research that's now quite accepted that says the next place for medical healing will be in healing our cellular memories, because those memories, that 5-year-old, that memory is in at a cellular level. All of our memories, every moment, every thought that we ever had, it's all in our body. Again, we're just not conscious to it. We're not thinking about it every day, but it's in there. It's healing those cellular memories that's going to make the biggest impact in medicine going forward. Because the only other option is what we've been doing, which is another prescription, another prescription, another prescription. That's the way the model is set up right now. Oh, you have this, here's the pill for that. Oh, now you have this, here's the pill for that. That never looks at why did that happen. So I'm not telling anybody to stop taking their pills, but what I'm saying is the research is showing that going forward to really heal, we have to look at the cellular memories that are in our body, and we have to heal those. We don't heal those by removing them because it happened. We heal it actually by, it's a different process, by negating the frequency of the anger, the frequency of the false interpretation, the false meaning, not lovable, not good enough. All of that is false. The truth is, we are fully loved. We are fully connected to God. We are fully capable. And all of that has been a lie that's just was created really by a 3-year-old, bottom line. So this was such a great topic today because, as I said, I did it this morning in my little coffee conversation, just a little 3-minute thing about this. And then several people have reached out to me during the day because people really live in the identity and the experience of their trauma. And that keeps them very sick and stuck. And the flip side of it is people who think they didn't really have trauma, nothing really happened to me. My childhood was good. I had a good family. My parents never got divorced, all of that. But yet I have panic attacks or I'm depressed. When we look and dig in, that's the thing, like the popsicle memory. That's the thing. I have a client who, she's one of 4 siblings, and her family has a funny joke about her. It's not, I was about to say it's not hurtful. What she realized was it actually was very hurtful for her. It was really painful. But it was just like she grew up in a normal family, loving family, both parents, not a big deal. But they teased her about one thing. And that one thing, even though she would laugh along with them, it actually was the driving force behind her panic attacks now as an adult. And it was just something silly from when she was little. But she was little enough when I think it was one of her siblings first made the joke, and then everybody sort of like caught on and it became the thing, which they still say today as she's a grown-up. They still tease her in the same way. And in one of our coaching calls, she was like, yeah, nothing really, no, I had a great childhood, all of that. And she's like, well, the one thing, my family says that, but nobody means anything by it. It doesn't hurt my feelings. Okay, let's take a look. And as we looked and talked, actually she started to cry. And she saw that it very much, when she got present to the unconscious meaning behind it, the reason that she was having panic attacks was because when she first got teased that way in her family, she decided it meant that she was really inept. She must be inept and bad at everything. And so feeling that way, every time now as a grown-up, she has to go do something, she gets anxiety, because who wouldn't if their subconscious background dialogue is, well, you're inept. Her family didn't use the word inept. Whatever they used to tease her, it was more of a regular word than inept. But they teased her that way, and that's what she decided about herself. I have another client who started to work with me with autoimmune conditions, terrible, terrible skin hives, terrible. And she is in her early 30s. Well, now she's probably mid-30s. This was at the beginning of the pandemic, which is already 3 years ago now. But she was vice president of a company in New York City here, of a department. We were on a coaching call talking about stress and her health. And she said, she was talking about her schedule. Now, this was during the pandemic. So she was working from home, getting up in the morning at like 6:30, grabbing a cup of coffee, getting on her computer and working all day. even till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, staying on the computer, exhausted. And when I said to her, why are you doing that schedule, 6:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night on your computer? And she said, well, now that we're not going into the office, I'm worried that my boss is going to realize that I'm a fraud at my job. I go, what do you mean a fraud at your job? She'd been at this job for 5 years. And in fact, her boss had given her paid time off to work with me on her health because she was such a valued employee and her health was really a problem. So I said to her, what do you mean a fraud? And she said, well, I got this job. It was like a fluke thing. I never was in human resources. And then they promoted me. Now I'm vice president of that department. And I'm always worried that she's going to figure out that I shouldn't be here. So I said, when did you first start to feel that way in your life ever? And she remembered being in first grade. She went to a Catholic school, and in first grade, she was struggling with her reading and her math. Those two subjects she was really struggling with. So the teacher said, go down to the hallway, get your sister out of third grade and bring her back here for a minute. And this is in front of the whole class. So she goes down to the third grade classroom, brings back her sister, and the teacher says to her sister, you were such a great student when I had you in first grade. You were so good at everything. Why are you such a terrible big sister? And both of the girls, this is in front of the whole class, both of the girls were like, shocked. And she says, you're a terrible big sister because your little sister is struggling. She's not doing good in reading. She's not doing good in math, and you're not helping her. And in that moment, what are we in first grade? 6? As a 6-year-old, in that moment, she decided she's the stupid one. And she went through the rest of her years in school, always trying to figure out what somebody else needed. And then she would try to be that, because in her own mind, if she's the stupid one and she can't really do it like her sister, if her sister did it so easily, something's wrong with her if she can't do it. And so she was always pretending how she showed up. So now at 32 years old, when we started to work together, her autoimmune conditions were terrible. Her skin was terrible, a reflection of her autoimmune conditions, which was all a reflection of the stress that she probably never, ever was not feeling since that moment at 6 years old. Her nervous system got so out of whack from being like trying and pretending. So she felt like a fraud in life. It's not that her boss would think she was a fraud. She felt like a fraud. And that feeling never, ever, ever went away, because that one moment, you could call that a traumatic event, being embarrassed in front of your classroom by something the teacher says. That was traumatic for sure. That was painful and embarrassing. But if she had been 11 or 15, or as an adult now looking at that scene, the interpretation would be very different. But the 6-year-old interpretation was, clearly something's wrong with me. And then she spent the rest of her life, up until her 30s, overworking, trying to be perfect, trying to figure out what people needed from her, and getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So I'm going to end with that thought and that story, because I could just give you 10 more, but I think you get the gist. It's not the event, however painful and big the event was, or however innocent and no big deal it seems. It's always, always the interpretation and the meaning that we create around it through the lens of whatever age we are when it happens. And so much of what we create happens when we're very, very little. That is the neuroprogramming, that is the rewiring that we have to get to in order to stop making trauma be driving your life down a path that you don't want to be on anymore. That's it. So that's what we do. If you have any questions about that, that's what I do in my Return to You program. It's called Return to You because it's returning you back to you and out of those misperceptions and wrong interpretations and meanings that have been really wrecking our life. returning to you, to who you truly are, and to the truth of you, and to the vibrant health and the way in the body that God intended for you to live. So that is the program. If you have any questions about that, I'd love to answer them. And if you have any questions about anything, I'd love to answer it. So thank you for tuning in and saying hello on this episode of The Unconditioned Life. This is a podcast as well as streaming all over social media. So you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, The Unconditioned Life. It's new, just started in January, but there's definitely episodes there that you might want to check out if this kind of topic, whether it's your health, things that aren't working in your life, feeling stressed, anxious, depressed, having relationships that don't work. The podcast is called The Unconditioned Life because, you're welcome, Charm, because it's that conditioning that's driving the life you have now. Until we uncondition it, deprogram it, kind of like pull a virus off the computer. There's nothing wrong with the computer, but somebody downloaded a virus. We got to clear off that virus in the way that you think and the way your body's running. That's all. Okay? So I'm sure I'll see you again later this week, but thank you so much for listening in. Have a great night.